The testimony of decorated war hero and top White House Ukraine advisor, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, seems to be doing major damage to the president's defense against impeachment in terms of both a quid pro quo and a possible cover-up. So let's start with a potential cover-up. Vindman's testimony is corroborating the claim in the whistleblower complaint that the White House locked down all records of the president's July 25th phone call with his Ukrainian counterpart. Citing people familiar with the testimony, the Washington Post reports this. Moments after President Trump ended his phone call with Ukraine's president on July 25th, an unsettled national security aide rushed to the office of White House lawyer John Eisenberg. Vindman, who told House investigators that he was alarmed after hearing President Trump pressure Ukrainian President Zelensky to investigate his political rivals, told Eisenberg that what the president did was wrong. And according to two people familiar with Vindman's account, Eisenberg then scribbled on a legal pad and, quote, proposed a step that other officials have said is at odds with long-standing White House protocol, moving a transcript of the call to a highly classified server and restricting access to it. Former Trump national security officials also tell the Post that Eisenberg had moved at least one other transcript of a Trump phone call to that classified server. NBC News has also learned from three sources that House impeachment investigators have asked Eisenberg and his deputy, Michael Ellis, to appear for a deposition on Monday. We do not know if either intends to appear or if the White House will seek to block their appearances. And the lieutenant colonel is also connecting other major dots in the probe. Two sources familiar with his testimony tell NBC News that Vindman told lawmakers that the White House meeting sought by the president of Ukraine, as well as the delivery of nearly $400 million in security and military aid, was contingent on Ukrainian officials carrying out multiple investigations sought by President Trump, including into the Bidens, Burisma, and the 2016 election. Sources say that Vindman drew a direct line between the deliverables for Ukraine and those investigations sought by President Trump.
So, you know, Steve Ratner, it's very simple. Vindman went to Eisenberg, told him of the president's misconduct, which will probably prove to be impeachable. And Eisenberg, the president's attorney, immediately took steps to cover it up and actually move unclassified material into a classified server. My God, that's serious business. And it's been revealed now by Eisenberg.
Yeah, now we have
Eisenberg. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I said by Eisenberg. No, the cover-up that Eisenberg is responsible for and participated in has now been exposed.
Yeah, what's extraordinary here is you now have a couple of new players, at least who've entered the public consciousness in this thing, who may well be guilty of a cover-up. But one of the thing that I think that I find most extraordinary about all this is you've now had this parade of witnesses, career diplomats, career military people with no political agenda in any way, people who served the president loyally for periods of time, come forward one by one, and based on all the testimony we've been able to hear about, they have corroborated every single piece of the whistleblower complaint. There has not been, to my knowledge, one substantive fact in the whistleblower complaint that has been contradicted by any evidence that has been turned up, not just by the Intelligence Committee, but by anybody else working on it. And now, as you say, on top of that, we have things that even go beyond the whistleblower complaint in terms of evidence of a cover-up by people in the Trump White House to keep us from finding out what the president and his aides actually did with respect to Ukraine and the aid and the Bidens and so forth.
You know, Willie, it's what's so funny when I hear people still, Republicans and Trumpists on Twitter or on cable news talking about the whistleblower. We're going to find out. They're like, why don't they buy a pet rock? Why don't they buy a mood ring? They're like so behind the times. It's ridiculous. Like that horse, as we say in the South, was let out of the barn several weeks ago, and we found out that everything the whistleblower said happened has happened now. So why exactly are these Republicans still trying to improperly track down the identity of a whistleblower who ended up being correct?
Because once again, they want to change the subject from the substance of what the whistleblower reported to the whistleblower's background, as they've tried to do unsuccessfully with Bill Taylor, and some people on TV have tried to do with Colonel Vindman. The identity of the whistleblower does not change what was in the whistleblower's report and what has since been corroborated by a number of witnesses. And Jeff Bennett, we may get more corroboration. Obviously, John Bolton is the big fish that most people want to hear from. He's been called next week. His attorneys, I guess, say he will not come voluntarily, but if he's subpoenaed, he may show up on Capitol Hill. And another big witness today, actually, in Timothy Morrison. Tell us who he is and why he may be so significant, because he was also on that July 25th phone call listening.
He was, and he's a central figure in this case that Democrats are building, Willie, because if you go back to Bill Taylor's testimony, the acting ambassador to Ukraine, Taylor mentions Morrison some 15 times. And it has to do largely with Morrison's misgivings about this entire Ukrainian pressure campaign. So Morrison wasn't a part of the NSC long, but as you rightly point out, he did listen in on that call. And according to Taylor's testimony, he told other White House officials, other State Department officials after the fact that it did not go that well. I'm paraphrasing something that Taylor said that Morrison told him. Now, we learned yesterday that Morrison let the White House know that he is leaving the NSC, and he would be the third official to do that. You have Kurt Volker, you have Michael McKinley. Both of them resigned amid this impeachment probe. Volker resigned so that he'd be freed up in terms of what he could tell House investigators. So Morrison is set to appear here today. I want to return back to something that Mika said about Lieutenant Colonel Vindman as she talked about our reporting, as he talked about those contingencies, those direct contingencies, that direct line that President Trump drew between the White House deliverables and the ask for Ukraine to open investigations into President Trump's political rivals. What's so interesting about that is that in his opening testimony, which we obtained, Vindman said, in his view, it was not proper for this administration to demand that a foreign government investigate a U.S. official. That word, demand, Willie, struck us as curious and conspicuous, right? Because he could have picked any number of words. He could have said it wasn't proper for the government to request, to suggest, to encourage. He used the word demand. So we did some digging, and it turns out that he went beyond that opening statement in his testimony and said explicitly that the White House, that President Trump, or the White House officials at President Trump's behest, rather, explicitly linked the White House deliverables and a demand for investigations into Burisma, into the Bidens, into the 2016 campaign. Vindman really telegraphing that quid pro quo that President Trump and his allies say do not exist. The same quid pro quo, mind you, that Mick Mulvaney admitted to before trying to walk it back a day later, Willie.
All right, NBC's Jeff Bennett and Garrett Haake, thank you guys both so much for your reporting.
Yeah.
And, you know, Jonah Goldberg wrote for the National Review yesterday that everybody knows, Republicans know, the White House knows, there was a quid pro quo. Yeah. It was there. So the more the president denies that quid pro quo, the more he assures himself that he's going to be impeached. Now, the president, of course, and Republicans were talking about how unpopular this impeachment inquiry would be several weeks ago, a month or so ago, saying that Americans wouldn't support it. It is interesting today that as we move toward the vote, the overwhelming majority of Americans in poll after poll after poll
they don't like
support this impeachment inquiry. And really, they agree with Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats. So we'll see what Republicans want to not only be on the wrong side of history here, but also want to be on the wrong side of the American people.
And the more people that come forward and testify, it just becomes impossible to debunk what happened. So it's very questionable as to why the Republicans keep going here.
It's
still ahead.
It's a personality cult or just blind loyalty.
It's still ahead on Morning Joe. There's always a tweet. When Barack Obama was president, Donald Trump thought 1.9% growth meant the economy was in deep trouble.
Well, listen, that's really bad, and I'm sure Donald Trump is glad that he doesn't have an economy growing at 1.9%. That would be really bad.
Yeah. No, actually, he calls
God.
that the greatest economy in American history. These days, he believes the same number signals the greatest economy. So Ratner is going to help us straighten this out. You're watching Morning Joe.
1.9.
We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.